Yes, Spotter is no more. And this underscores how tough it is to build a SaaS solution for the creators. You see, for you to be able to build a sustainable business, essentially the enterprise targeting the creator economy, you really have three paths towards the sustainability and one path that leads you to failure. And one of those three paths, they're all kind of like mostly mutually exclusive at the very beginning while you're still going through like Series A and B stages. Curious about those stages. I made the entire series of videos about different stages of the investments, but you either have to have a very large and successful B2C business, so business to consumer, essentially what Spotter was. It was a B2C technically, right? From the perspective of creators were the customers and we would go subscribe and buy. The difference being that for the enterprises, in the general SaaS world, you're kind of like B2B or B2C, right? You can be selling to the businesses, you can be selling to the customers. Creators are kind of like in between the customers and the businesses. You can, depending on, I guess, how you flip it. But in that case, you need to have a very large set of subscribers for you to be able to sustainably pursue this industry, right? Long term. And we're going to talk about the limitations and challenges that it presents itself. Then you either have to go really after enterprise type ARR. So essentially you're saying, hey, I'm not going to focus on the B2C side of the world. Think about it, maybe users who pay up to like $200 per month, right? Like I would say like $200 and above, you're entering the area of kind of like more of an enterprise grade solution. Anywhere below, I would say you're still kind of like dabbling in B2C or small business ARR type business. And ARR, annual recurring revenue, essentially subscription-based revenues. The second path is like you're going just after businesses. You're saying, screw the small creators. We're going after the biggest, fishes in a pond and kind of like try to sell to them and charge them tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars per year for our solution. Completely different ballgame, completely different type of solution. And as you can imagine, limitations there as well. And then finally, you just have to be very frugal. You have to have a very low cash burn, likely a very small team working on your solution. Maybe it's like a 10, 15-person team working on a solution. You have like a little bit of a subscription, maybe a little bit of enterprise business, and that's how you become sustainable. Pretty much in the current state of the economy, if you don't do one of those three, you're failing. And unfortunately, I think this is where we're catching Spotter Studio right now. And coming back to the kind of like the solution itself, if you've never seen it before, this is how it looks like. It's essentially a chat. It's a bunch of different ways that you can brainstorm the ideas for a video, right? Funny enough, just like to show you the example, some of the things and some of the chats that I've had all the way down to essentially all sorts of ideas, like the idea for this specific video, right? And thinking about the titles, thumbnails, and that's what it allowed you to do. And it had a lot of other interesting features in terms of like tracking outliers, helping you really think through the idea. For example, if you look at in development for this specific, you're probably going to see the thumbnail over here, something similar, right? They conveniently placed this banner that closes our access to actually see. But if we're going to go just do this, and let's find the object. This is the object. Hide the element. And there you go. So you essentially can go and like generate different thumbnails, create concepts for the video, think about the story beats for the video, think about the package itself and kind of like how it compares when it actually posted, as well as you can post the notes. And obviously I'm not posting the notes because I wanted to use this as an example, but I have my own code system where how I track the videos that I make, and then you would see a bunch of different notes for scripts, links for the presentations, articles, things of that nature. So very convenient solution, but unfortunately where they find themselves right now is essentially in a few places, right? Number one, if you come back to this whole idea about building the large B2C and finding enough creators who can afford something like this, if we take a look, I think at this article, essentially from Goldman Sachs, they estimate that only about 4% of the global creators are actually professional enough and make over 100K a year. And I would say even this, considering the current, again, economic environment and the cost of living, at least here in the United States, assuming you have a team, right? Like even this is not enough, I think, to justify sometimes solution like Spotter, which was about, I think, $50 per month. The only reason why I don't know, for the full transparency, I was kind of like part of the product advisory group, so I would meet regularly with the team, advise them on the solution. Clearly didn't do good enough of a job, I guess. But yeah, I would get it for free, so I didn't have to pay for the year that I've been using it. But you kind of have to be probably like in the top 2% of the creators to be able to afford this kind of solution. So coming back to this world, B2C is not really possible here. You can go after enterprise and say like, hey, we're going to go after enterprise ARR. And again, behind the paywall, not paying for this report, but we see enough what I needed to see, which is essentially you have about 700 companies really targeting, according to at least this report iPro, who are targeting the creator economy, right? And again, 700 is not nearly enough, I think, to target the enterprise, especially considering the fact that Spotter has a very unique niche for what they're offering through the Spotter Studio, which again, we're going to talk a little bit about targeting and the challenges over there further down the line in this video. But again, enterprise wasn't necessarily a path, which leaves you with a low cash burn, which again, hard to tell because they're a private company, so I don't know exactly their numbers, but we're going to talk about some of the financial limitations down the line as well. So yes, that's the challenge. This is why I think for the Spotter Studio, when we think about the reality of like, okay, how did we end up here, is the fact that they had a hard time achieving, right, some of these metrics. And coming back to the fact that, okay, Tahir, but why wouldn't they expand? Why wouldn't they go broader and do other things? I want to talk a little bit about the concept called ICP. So ICP is essentially your ideal customer profile. The idea behind this three-letter term is essentially, do you as a company understand who you need to sell to? What do those people look like? What do those companies look like if you're selling to a business? Where they're located geographically, how mature they are, how much money they're making, so on and so forth. You've seen personas before, I'm sure. And we spoke a little bit about the personas in one of my prior videos when it comes to the creator economy. But the idea is, as a company, you should always know who your like target, perfect customer is. And I think the difference that you have here and the challenge that was in front of Spotter, which I don't blame them for, right, is that they created really amazing tool, really, really good for a very specific number of individuals, which is kind of like that's their map of the ICP, for very simplified terms, because their niche solution, they have this ICP, and there's like emptiness for the ARR expansion from there. Again, right, like recurring revenue outside of it, it's really tough because like who else needs to go and like work on titles and thumbnails for a video? Creators who make this kind of videos regularly. And guess also what? Creators who essentially have enough money, right, to afford something like this. And there's no one really beyond. You can argue that, hey, maybe expansion into the teams within the creator team, and they've introduced some like team-based, access points and things of that nature, and project management within the tool, which was more catered towards like multiple different team members accessing the platform and working together on different videos, right? Like more of like a project management tool, almost like for videos. But it was very kind of like experimentation level step, I would say, that they announced about a year ago at VidCon. So from that perspective, that's pretty much it. There's nothing else for them to expand into with this solution unless you start building out completely new features to go after the enterprise market, which again, we just discussed, pretty challenging to go after with the amount of companies that are targeting the creator economy. And in a normal situation, like your argument, if you made that argument like, hey, why wouldn't they expand and go into different other business parts? Like this is more what, and again, very rudimentary visualization. I'm not a visual designer, clearly. This would look like for the broader package, meaning you have, say, a SaaS solution like Adobe Creator Cloud, right? Which is, you can sell it to the video creators, you can sell it to the photographers, you can sell it to the podcasters, you can sell it to the enterprises. You have different layers of different people who can consume and use your tools. And you have this kind of like, circles of like maybe ICP for them is like individual, again, like myself, who creates, who makes video and images and audio. And this is kind of like their core audience who they would love to have a business with. But then if you just make photos, you're still interesting to them. If you just make enterprise, ads, you're using it to create ads for your enterprise, you're still a good client for them, right? And that's how like they create packages and pricing and types of subscription tiers, things of that nature. So they have an opportunity to go tap into different levels where, again, nothingness, unfortunately, for Spotter. And you start kind of like, again, looking back at this chart and realize, yeah, there wasn't necessarily opportunity here. There wasn't opportunity here. So what's left is really thinking about the cash burn. And for the full transparency, like you can think about the cash burn from the perspective of both. You can get away from it by decreasing the percentage of your spending as a total, valuation, total revenue potential of your company by essentially just making more money, right? You can kind of like run away from the cash burn by just making more and more revenue. And we'll talk about in a second from the microeconomical environment why it was a challenge, besides what we just discussed about limitations on the ICP side and just limitation number of enterprise businesses are out there. There's like more global things that are pushing back on this industry. But there's also from the perspective of, again, if you cannot do that, you can then go and say, hey, let's revisit our cost structure. Let's see where we can trim things to just be able to afford maintaining the business for a little while longer. And this is where the macroeconomic environment comes in because, again, not paying for this report, but again, luckily we can see what we need to see, which is essentially, according to Nielsen, right? Chief marketers essentially planning to cut faintly visible 54% of the marketers are thinking about cutting their spend this year, and very similar kind of like I've seen reports for next year in terms of how much they're going to allocate the funds towards just general marketing, right? And again, that comes back to the we've discussed for a few videos now, just economic pressures, people spending less, which means enterprises making less money, which means enterprises spend less, which means that there's less ad dollars out there to go and promote the products in many of the cases, right? There are exclusions obviously from the rule, but you already have this pressure, right? So like that conversation about, hey, you can run away from your cash burn by making more money, it's actually tougher right now because there is this pressure. And this pressure, by the way, the reason why I wanted to bring it up, Spotter Studio is part of the Spotter organization, and Spotter is primarily kind of like was founded as a licensing like distributor. I'm forgetting exactly the term that they used to refer to themselves, but essentially their whole business structure was, hey, we're gonna come in and we're gonna license your back catalog, pay you money up front so you as a creator can go and invest money into some big projects right now, while we're gonna be making money off of your AdSense, and you're gonna give us all AdSense for the next X number of months from that back catalog, from those videos. And we're going to have a marketing team, and we're going to place maybe some additional ads against those videos, right? So because they work with multiple different creators, they have more inventory, so they can offer it to broader number of their business partners and essentially grow this way, right? That was part of the reason why Amazon, for example, invested in Spotter last year. But as you can tell, again, with this kind of like stats, that business is hurting. And SaaS business from the Spotter Studio perspective is still trying to kind of like pick up the pace, find the subscribers, make money. And they're draining funds from that side of the business, right? From the licensing business. And now licensing business is struggling this year, allegedly, right? Like this is me guessing based on the macroeconomic environment that they are not doing necessarily as hot as probably they were doing 2-3 years ago. So now you start facing this decision, okay, where we're going to go with this, right? And you can go about it a couple of ways. One of the ways is obviously, and unfortunately, revisiting the cost by like essentially cutting some of the cost lines, which unfortunately comes back to people. And this is where I wanted to bring up, and again, not paying for for Bloomberg as well. I'm cheap, clearly, but you essentially have from the preview that you can tell here, in November, right, they did a round of layoffs of 15%, and then again another 40%, which is 50% again. Like not many people, 35, thankfully, but it's 35 families, 35 individuals who were affected, and it was 15% of the staff. So 40% was already like tipping up closer to like 30, 40%, probably like closer to 30% of the entire business. And even looking right now, right? And again, LinkedIn is not always perfect because someone who was laid off sometimes keep the current title of their company in their kind of like present job until they find the next one. So this number probably is even lower. So you definitely can imagine the rounds of layoffs that they've had essentially cut big chunks of company. The company is probably like half the size at least, if not less now compared to before. And that's probably also reflective of those staffers, right? I wouldn't be surprised if that's some of the software engineers, some of the project managers, individuals who essentially been supporting Spotter Studio. And unfortunately, more of them will be affected, I think, in light of this news. And they did say in one of the other articles I saw that Spotter is planning to maintain the business and essentially maintain like the tool itself, likely for like internal use cases. Maybe they're going to make it as a perk for you as a creator. If you're like signing up with them and you're licensing your back catalog, they're going to offer you this tool, or maybe they're working on another solution and this is where they're going to offer it to you, right? But this brings me back to kind of like one of the last points I wanted to make about this entire process is that as a business, laying off individuals, unfortunately, closing down business ideas, projects like this is unfortunate, especially you work like for a couple of years probably developing it. But sometimes it's actually the right decision, right? As painful as it is, because there are two factors, as I said. One being the drainage on potential other parts of the business. So you're essentially throwing good money after bad money, in the sense of, if this side of the business, this tool is not making enough money to justify its existence, it's draining money from the good side of the business. It's maybe even profitable and doing okay, even in the current economic environment. All of a sudden you're starting to create this balance, and you're taking on the water as a boat, and you might flip over. Because of the fact that you have this ballast. So you kind of have to cut it, right? So there's this one effect where it can be the right decision, even though someone like myself who loved the tool is not excited about it. And having friends who work on this tool at Spotter, knowing that their jobs won't be affected, sucks as well, right? And I'll definitely reach out and make sure I help where I can. But from the perspective of the other flip side of this, maybe even if you're making okay money on both sides, or say, imagine after all the layoffs, they kind of like balanced out the cost and the Spotter Studio still makes okay money, like it's breaking even. There's also the factor of the opportunity cost. And essentially, opportunity cost comes into a few ways. One being, you have the team, you have all these funds locked in supporting this tool. Maybe you have another project that you're about to work on, and you've been slowly kind of like coming up and working on as a company, and you don't have any other extra like spare change in your pockets or in the cushions of your couch to go and invest into this. So one of the better solution is to say like, hey, this business is okay, it's helpful, it's useful, but it's not our future. Clearly we're struggling to pick up the pace and kind of like create something unique about it and make boatloads of money. Let's shut it down, move all these resources over to the other side, and invest in this new other project. So it's opportunity cost from that perspective. And it's also opportunity cost from the perspective of just the attention from the leadership team, from the marketing materials, from all those things, because you still have a limited number of other resources, right? Leadership attention, project management attention, software developers potentially, other things that you can be doing, right? And you kind of have to keep thinking about, okay, what am I doing with this tool? So it sucks, but this is the kind of decision that sometimes, again, I'm speculating and I'm listing out multiple different scenarios. If that was the case, as bad as it is from the perspective of the user, it actually can be justifiable if it means maybe they're actually saving people from the layoffs and no one's going to be affected because they're managing to move those individuals over to this other new project, and they're going to be employed and they're going to still be, paid well. No one's going to be negatively affected, and really it's just the users who've been enjoying the tool who will have this negative impression and will lose access to it. But if it means people are employed and they have a chance, like, second chance at the bat to go and create something new, I would be very welcoming to this option, right? Again, as much as I would want to have access and would want to use this kind of tool going forward, it kind of sucks to see it go. But if individuals are not affected, if they manage to do something positive with it and maybe create some new interesting solution in the future that we're going to get to enjoy, hey, I guess it all worked out. So time will tell, but it's definitely a challenging situation. That's why I keep coming back to the fact that it's tough to build businesses really just targeting the creator economy. I've spoken to some of the startup founders in the past. I've spoken to some companies who are thinking about like building solutions for the creators, and they like interviewed me to get my opinion on the solution. That's one of those things I always keep bringing up, right? It's like, it's a tough environment to work in, because the benefit that we receive and the reason why like you still see creators making millions of dollars, and you have all this population of other creators all over the world that kind of like middle class that's still making decent enough money or building businesses adjacent to the creator economy. Ultimately, if you boil it all the way down, right, like distill this entire industry, creator economy is essentially a very effective promotional tool. It's a marketing channel. We just flipped it a little bit on its head, because creators who in the prior lives would have been just like, your marketing agencies, you're just like, place to put the ads against, right? Like the inventory as like a cable channel. We flipped it on its head, and we just made those individuals in charge basically of the entire process, in charge of the production, distribution, in charge of the ideation. And they also, because of the fact that they were in charge of all these things, get to benefit from all this ad spend coming in. We're in a more traditional media company that ad spend getting divided by different departments, by different needs, and there's like hundreds of people working on a single piece of content. Here you have one individual, or maybe individual plus a couple of team members on the freelance contracts, who manage to create all of this and they charge the same amount of money, right? So obviously you have this like overblown exposure. Oh my God, these guys are making millions of dollars. They're like charging $50,000 per net spot per video, and they make like, 15 videos a month. So they're making a ton of money. But again, it's very, I would say, it's survivorship bias based perspective, because there are plenty of creators who make $0. There are plenty of others who make just a few $100 here and there from their content, right? Again, depending on their niche. And this is where a lot of successful creators expand, right? And I've spoken in other videos about the expansion paths into the products, into the consulting, into the events, into digital production, like different things. There are a lot of different ways for the creators to still build sustainable businesses, but they're not necessarily creator economy based. They're just targeting the niches that they're either coming from, or they're targeting the niches from where their viewers coming from. So that's what kind of like raises this balance, where if you look from the outside in, you look at this industry and say, I see so many people making money. I see all these individuals hiring all this, everyone else like, oh, this is awesome. I can jump in as a SaaS company and offer them a solution. You can still do it. I think there's still tools out there that are pretty successful with this. But back to the challenges that I discussed earlier, you kind of have to then pick one of those three paths. You either have to go really be successful at accumulating those like B2C customers. You either have to figure out how you build the enterprise business on the back of it, or you just make sure you're not over hiring and don't build like 200-person team to support this solution. Rather have like 5-10 people maybe working on it, vibe coding, I don't know, depending on the solution that you're building. But there are ways for you to essentially be successful while still targeting the creator economy, but you kind of have to follow one of those three paths, or unfortunately, like Spotter Studio, you end up being shut down. So let me know in the comment section below what you think about this video. I hope you found it helpful, and I'll see you next Saturday. Peace.